Tonight, let us review the aims of yoga. Yoga envisages two possible goals, as we have known it. One is the liberation of the consciousness principle. The other, the transformation of the nature. A third form may be that which we have been considering in the writings of Sri Aurobindo. Let me repeat. There are two contrasting forms of the aim of yoga. One is that of the liberation of the consciousness principle. The other, that of the transformation of the nature. A third possible form is that presented by Sri Aurobindo, inasmuch as he conceives of an integration of both a liberation and a transformation. The particular value of Sri Aurobindo lies in this fact that more than any other Oriental sage, he effects a crossing between Western man and Eastern man. And the methods which he teaches are therefore more apt to be adapted to the peculiar nature of Western man than any of the ancient Oriental teachings. Aurobindo is familiar with the intellectual and scientific background of Western man. Here then there is the possibility of techniques that are more universal in their availability than those which we have known heretofore. There is one psychologist in the West who has been brought to the problem of yoga through his experience with his patients. I refer to Dr. Carl G. Jung. Certain points that he makes are very important. For instance, science is a cultural heritage of Western man, which he can not safely discard entirely in order to adapt himself to an Eastern yoga. Western man has a certain intellectual development that has been fundamental in his cultural experience, which the Oriental of old did not know. And the Oriental of the present day knows it insofar as he does by his learning from the West and perhaps imitating the West. But in any case, this intellectual scientific culture is not fundamental in the background of the Oriental culture. Now, our scientific background has, with its obvious advantages, given us certain liability. We have reached a point where we seem to agree with certain positions that are affirmed in the Buddhist and other Oriental yogas. The position, namely, that formations, psychical formations, are illusions. Now, while it's true that in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, for instance, which is a Buddhistic text, it is said that when the soul that is passed on has appeared before him the gods of wrath and the beneficent God, he should not regard them as real entities, but as essentially formations of his consciousness. And as a demonstration of his superiority to these gods, he should march right into the gods of wrath and not be attracted by the gods of beneficence, but cling wholly and alone to the clear light. But the Buddhist position, as Dr. Jung points out, presupposes a natural belief in the gods being, in psychological terms, powers of the psyche. He's believed in them so strongly that they have become too great a power in his life. They have fulfilled that office, and the yogic move that must then be taken is towards a transcendence of the gods. In other words, one who has not first known the gods is in no position to transcend the gods. Western man imagines he has transcended the gods, when in point of fact he has not. He has as yet to become acquainted with them. I thought I would read a couple of paragraphs from Jung's commentary to The Secret of the Golden Flower, which is rather thought-provoking. Therefore, it is better, Jung says, for Western man not to know too much about the secret insight of Eastern wise men, because it would then be a case of the right means in the hands of the wrong man. Instead of again convincing himself that the diamond is an illusion, the Westerner ought to experience the reality of this illusion again. He ought to learn to recognize the psychic powers again, and not wait until his moods, nervous states, and insane ideas make clear to him in the most painful possible way that he's not the only master in his house. The splitting tendencies are effective psychic personalities of a relative reality. They are real when they are not recognized as real and are therefore projected. Relatively real when they are related to the conscious. In religions, this stage leads to the forming of a cult. But they are unreal insofar as consciousness has begun to detach itself from its content. This whole paragraph is rather recondite. Take the statement. They are real when they are not recognized as real and are therefore projected. In other words, we have powers or forces in our being, in our psyche, as it were, that for most of us are unconscious powers. They produce effects upon us. And though we deny their existence, in fact, all the more because we deny their existence, the power is real. But when we deny their existence, do not recognize them, we tend to project this quality from our own unconscious into the other fellow, into the object. And thus you get the persecution of peoples and of races when it's on a massive form. In that case, Jung says they are real when they're not recognized as real. They're relatively real when they have come into some connection with consciousness, the conscious side of man. That is, I mean the ordinary relative conscious side of man. And finally, when consciousness has been able to detach itself from all content, then they cease to be real. This means that we're dealing with a relative notion of reality and unreality. Not an absolute unreality, not an absolute reality here, but with powers that are effective in certain conditions, and on other conditions are no longer relevant. Now, these powers do manifest in certain states of consciousness, and particularly in certain transitions in the yogic practice. One has experiences in which he sees various formations, various beings. They may come to him in dreams. They may come in what is known as the hypnagogic vision. That's a waking state that is sleep-like. It's a semi-trance state. Or they may come in a full savikalpa samadhi, in which there's a severance of consciousness with this plane, but it's not a sleeping state. What are these? What sort of reality do they possess? The question calls for a rather complex answer. The formations, in some cases, may be no more than subjective formation, symbolical of something which is happening in one's own consciousness privately. But the question arises, may they be also existences, superphysical existences beyond? Some of them. The answer of Sri Aurobindo on this latter question would be positive. He would agree that sometimes they're only subjective, only have a reference to the individual consciousness, therefore essentially symbolic. But at the same time, it is possible to contact beings of other planes in these states of consciousness. The question has arisen oftentimes is whether there are such metaphysical existences, and how is one to prove whether there are such metaphysical existences. I was prepared to have a questioning mind here tonight, and was intended to take up this question at some length. However, it is hardly necessary in connection with this group alone. The two views of that which is typically the non-tantric Buddhist, and that which is represented by Sri Aurobindo and others like him, take a contrasting position here. The Buddhist denies this metaphysical order as being real. Aurobindo affirms that there is a metaphysical order that is real. I've been spending some time in getting you acquainted with the teachings of Sri Aurobindo. As in the past, we have devoted some time to the Buddhist teachings. I am not going to undertake to adjudicate between these two positions. I simply wish to present them with as much justice as I can. Our primary concern is with a philosophy and a technique that will lead on towards realization, and philosophies that do contrast nonetheless can be effective means towards the realization. For practical yoga, one does not have to decide which philosophic position is the truer. But it is important for us to come to a just appreciation of these different possibilities that grow out of states of realization. For the standpoint of the Buddhist and the standpoint of Sri Aurobindo is in each instance grounded in profound realizations. The thought that has come to me in connection with this problem is that the ultimate nature, or the nature of ultimate being, is such that a number of different philosophic views, or a number of different portraits, can be true in the sense of part truths. It is as though one approached this ultimate reality from one or another of different perspectives, and from these different perspectives it appeared differently. And therefore, we are not forced to draw the conclusion that the one or the other of two contrasting philosophies yogic philosophy must be false. But on the other hand, we are free to choose that philosophy which fits in with our individual sense of truth. Jung goes on to say, after the last sentence or fraction of a sentence, but they are unreal insofar as consciousness has begun to detach itself from its contents. However, the latter is only the case when life has been lived so exhaustively and with such devotion that no more unfulfilled life duties exist, and when therefore there are no more desires which cannot be sacrificed without hesitation. In a word, this detachment of consciousness can only begin when nothing remains to prevent an inner superiority to the world. It is futile to lie to oneself about this. Wherever one is caught, one is still possessed. And when one is possessed, it means the presence of something stronger than himself. Truly from thence wilt thou ne'er come forth until thou hast paid the last farthing. It is not a matter of unconcern whether one calls something a mania or a god. To serve a mania is detestable and undignified, but to serve a god is full of meaning and rich in possibility, because it means yielding to a higher, invisible, and spiritual being. The personification enables one to see the relative reality of the autonomous partial system, which in turn makes its assimilation possible and depotentializes the forces of external life. When God is not recognized, selfish desires develop, and out of this selfishness comes illness. Perhaps you can see part of the bearing of the yoga of surrender. Surrender to the divine. One must first find the God as real before he is ready to effect the detachment of consciousness from its contents. In other words, Western man is not ready to take the step of detachment of consciousness from content, but must first surrender to the God, to the divine. To the surrender to the divine becomes real to man. Yoga teaching assumes the recognition of gods to be something granted. Its secret instruction is therefore only intended for him whose light of consciousness is capable of freeing him from the powers of life, in order to enter into the ultimate, undivided unity, into the center of emptiness, where dwells the God of utmost emptiness and light, as our text says. To hear such a teaching is difficult to attain in 1,000 eons. Obviously, the veil of Maya cannot be lifted by a mere decision of reason, but demands the most thoroughgoing and wearisome preparation consisting in the right payment of all debts of life. For as long as one is in any way held by the domination of cupiditas, the veil is not lifted, and the heights of a consciousness, empty of content and free of illusion, are not reached, nor can any trick nor any deceit bring it about. It is an ideal that can only be completely realized in death. Till then, there are real and relatively real figures of the unconscious. Right there, we're having a contribution to a Western yoga in those words, and in fact in the body of all of the commentary in this book. The question as to whether there is a metaphysical reality is one on which I've placed a good deal of thought. Let us look at things this way. What do we mean by metaphysical reality? This, I think, is the answer. It implies that corresponding to subtle psychical experiences, there are superphysical existence. Beings, in other words. Fields. Relationships. On our ordinary relationship to this world, we have our share experience that exists in our mind, in our individual consciousness, and in a measure in our collective consciousness. The only contact we have with anything is actually something that's already in our consciousness. The objects around us exist for us as sense impressions, and they fill up a complex of those sense impressions. But all of that is something in our consciousness. It is our custom and our habit to view these elements in our consciousness as corresponding to a physical existence out beyond. Now, the affirmation of a metaphysical actuality or reality is doing the same thing with respect to subtle experiences, subtle states of consciousness. There's no question about the actuality of these states of consciousness because they are experienced. Do they correspond to a metaphysical reality beyond them? It's just as reasonable to suppose that they do as it is to suppose that our experiences here correspond to a physical reality beyond them. Now there are four possible positions that one can take here. One can say that there is a real existence corresponding to our physical sense experiences, but that there is no real existence corresponding to the experiences of dream, of hypnagogic vision, or of samadhi. Or we can imagine another position which would affirm that there is no physical reality corresponding to these sense experiences, but that there is a metaphysical reality corresponding to the subtle experiences. Third, We may take the position that affirms that there is a physical reality and a metaphysical reality corresponding to experiences of the two types. And fourth, we may deny reality of a physical existence or a metaphysical existence corresponding to these experiences, affirming simply that the experiences and the consciousness which bears them is all that there is. Now, three of those positions have been maintained. The materialist maintains the first one. I don't know whether anybody or any group or class has ever maintained that there are metaphysical existence, but that there are no physical existence. I don't know whether anyone has taken that position. But if I had to choose between the two, I'd be more inclined to affirm a metaphysical existence myself than a physical existence. That is, if I had to choose between those two positions. The position of Sri Aurobindo is one that affirms that there is an existence corresponding to physical experience and an existence corresponding to our subtle experience. The Shunya Buddhist maintains that there is neither a physical existence nor a metaphysical existence. But only a consciousness, vijnana, which supports the play of states of apparent formation that have no substance in them. Therefore, this form of Buddhist philosophy is called an emptiness philosophy. It's empty of substance. Substance being equivalent to affirming an existence. The only reality being a flux in consciousness. I don't know whether you get the subtlety of this distinction here. This would present in rather strong terms the difference in view between Aurobindo and the Shunya Buddhist. There is something powerful for practical yoga in the Buddhist position. I know that if one starts to wipe away all value from experience, treat it as just empty and without significance, just a play which you may ignore or participate in, but carefully avoid taking seriously. View it as having no effect upon you. Just drop it off. Let it go. Attach no value to the meaning of evolution, development, process, either in the gross or the subtle sense. One succeeds in doing that radically. He can relatively quickly and with suddenness experience the detachment of consciousness from its content. And when consciousness is so detached, it is as though the whole of formation was just erased, just dissolved. And here lies simply an illimitable field of pure consciousness, utterly complete in every sense, with every possible potential in it, but in its essence, unconcerned with either the presence or the absence of formation. Quite clearly, that's something that appeals only to certain temperaments. It is feasible only for those who have, as Dr. Jung has pointed out, become superior to all essential desire. Reached a point where he no longer feels that anything is essential to him that experience can give, where he can touch experience or let it go with ease, no longer looks upon it as a guru or teacher. And I mean all kinds of experience, but just rests back on the pure consciousness itself. Now this can be realized. Properly, we should not use the word experience in connection with this at all. And for that reason I invented a word which I called introception. It's a new way of consciousness, or a new movement, our movement in consciousness, which couldn't properly be called experience, couldn't properly be called reasoning, or conceptual cognition at all. But this just disassociation from all content, and one is back in the illimitable infinity of a pure consciousness. Now that sort of thing isn't a step-by-step process. When the break comes, it's sudden and radical. And that's why the six patriarchs emphasized the point of its suddenness. There are no steps or stages really from formation to pure detached consciousness. You're at one time in the state of consciousness concerned with formation and then instantaneously detached. It's like a shift from a finite order to an infinite, instantaneously. Just an overturn, a radical overturn when that happens. But that kind of yoga is not concerned with transformation of the nature. When we're dealing with transformation of the nature, we're entering the field of evolution, the process of becoming something different. Yoga, in this sense, serves a different kind of end. And it's not impossible to conceive that the two yogas may be brought together, so that the one who has realized the detachment of consciousness may again reassume connection with experience and formation, entering from above, as it were, and playing with formation as a sort of lila, as a play, not a serious business, and then undertake the task of transformation of the nature. It's also conceivable that an individual who approaches yoga, first of all, from an interest in transformation, may, after he has progressed to a certain critical point, also realize the detachment of consciousness from its content. I think for most individuals, transformation of the nature is a more understandable and a more wished-for achievement. When you're dealing with transformation of nature, the progress is step by step. It's not a sudden, at one moment, overturn, but a progressive advance. You see, if consciousness is detached from its content, it means that the consciousness principle withdraws from the nature, the adhar, and it's no concern of it whether that nature is defective or not. It just severs from it. The nature being viewed as irrelevant. It's severed from it. Traditionally, the individual who has achieved that detachment continues correlated with the body until the body runs down. He doesn't try to perfect the body, or the vital, or the mental, to use Aurobindo's psychology, but just detaches himself from it as much as possible and lets it run down. When that body runs down, there's no compulsion to make him reincarnate again. But if one is concerned with transformation of the nature, then there is a progressive making over of the mind and of the vital and ultimately of the physical, so that they may become fit vehicles, fit instruments of a higher power. The higher power being that which we call the divine. And this note is a long labor necessarily. We're dealing with something that is necessarily in the time field because it's in the range of evolution, a space and time process. We have a perfecting of the nature until finally it becomes ideally a perfect instrument, or at least so we envisage the possibility, or Aurobindo so envisages it. Now, it's entirely possible that one who deals with the transformation of the nature, has followed that way, has a compensation for his laborious working with detail, may know numerous moments or periods of spiritual and other subtle experiences which may not come the way of the one who follows the other path, and which indeed the one who follows the other path would try to avoid, because he's going after only one thing, the radical turnover. If I were to put this question to all people who could understand the conception of yoga, which really would you rather do? Dissociate consciousness from content, be utterly unconcerned thereafter with process, of perfecting? Or would you rather go step by step in the evolution, perfecting the nature, that is, the physical, the vital, and the mental, transforming it, not simply perfecting it, transforming and perfecting, until it becomes divinized. That is, a vehicle or an instrument of a divine being. That divine being also your own true person. In the first yoga, there is no place, no ultimate place for the notion of person. Person being but a concept valid within the field of relations. In the second yoga, the person in a divine sense remains permanent. I have here presented the picture of the two contrasting goals and the suggestion of their possible synthesis in the two ways. First, of one who has achieved the dissociation of consciousness and then voluntarily returns to working with the nature, and the one who has worked first upon the transformation of the nature and ultimately received the dissociation of consciousness from its content. After we've had the offering and perhaps sung again, I'll throw the meeting open for questions.
In between this life and next, Bardo shines in dreams of space. See them all in oneness whole, have knowledge of your soul. In this pure and soft great space, the stars are bubbles floating by. Precious night when dreams are free, live eternally, love eternally.